Good day everyone, in this video we are going to talk about writing fiction, particularly the different modes of fiction. But before that, let's have a review of what fiction is. Fiction are stories based on the writer's imagination and creativity. Pretty much it makes use of the writer's imaginative skills when coming up with meaningful content. Also, fiction may be in short stories, vignettes, fables, novellas, plays, or novels. It is worth noting that regardless of the form, it would always involve elements and adhere to patterns and features that make the literary works effective. Now at this point we're going to talk about modes of fiction. Modes of fiction refers to the types of writing of which all fiction is made. Recognizing these modes can help aspiring writers to come up with good literary works by observing various structures and manners on how to write fiction. Now, generally, there are 5 modes of fiction. We have description, action, dialogue, thought, and exposition. At this point, let us focus on description. Description helps set the mood and the scene in the story. Also, description gives details about some place, person, event, or object. It also helps the readers become immersed with the fictional world of a character in a story because it makes use of detailed descriptions and explanations of what is happening in a particular event in a story. As such, it relies on the writer's effective use of imagery to have a clear description that appeals to the senses. Now, it is worth noting that while it is important to have a clear description of what is going on in a particular event, writers should avoid over-describing events in order to avoid giving too much information about what is happening in that particular scene. Let's look at this example here. John woke up to the sound of the pouring rain. As he opened his eyes, he realized that it was barely morning. The room was dim. Through his bedroom window, he could see the sky covered with dark rain clouds. As he slowly rose from his bed, he turned to look at the clock. It was 4 o'clock in the morning of a Friday. He then grabbed his towel and headed downstairs where he saw his grandmother and aunt watching the news on television, clearly anticipating something urgent. That's when he realized a storm was coming. Now, as mentioned earlier, description as a mode of writing in fiction uses imagery in order to clearly describe what is happening in a particular scene through the use of descriptive words or phrases that appeal to the senses. From the sound of the pouring rain, to seeing the sky covered with dark rain clouds, up to the moment when he saw his grandmother and aunt watching the news on television, it gives the readers an idea of what is happening in this particular scene. Thus, they would have an idea, they would have an assumption of what might happen. Now, the next mode of fiction is action. Action describes the actions that happen in the story. Now, it is worth noting that actions here refer to how the characters move or act towards a certain event or complication in the story. This is important as the readers become engaged to the story depending on what happens to the characters. Also, the actions in the story moves the story forward, because the actions that characters do in the story would reveal certain information about the characters. Furthermore, the action as mode of fiction doesn't only refer to the actual action, but it can also include dialogue, gestures, and other activities. Next, we have the dialogue. The dialogue would refer to the spoken action in the story. It refers to the interaction between characters. Now, the dialogue in the story is important as it helps in the evolution of the characters. This is because the character's dialogue would help in revealing certain details about that particular character. Also, the dialogue would help boost the pace and narration of the story because the interaction between characters would lead to certain complications which would lead to further events in the story. Now, it is important that writers should avoid making characters sound alike. It is important to remember that the character's dialogue very much reflects his or her personality. Remember that no two characters have the same personality, very much like in real life. Therefore, it is important that one particular character would have a different manner in terms of speaking or the use of words compared to another character. Next, we have thought. Thought, together with dialogue, helps move the story along. Thought also helps build tension as well as reveal something about a particular character. Thought is important as it allows the readers to know what's going on in a character's mind. Also, writers may even contrast the character's dialogue to his or her actual thoughts to include a certain controversy or a certain twist in a particular scene or a particular event. This would also reflect to the personality or the characteristic of a particular character. Let's have another example. For this example, we're going to include description, action, dialogue, and thought. It was definitely a steep mountain to climb. It was wrong of me to join here, thought Jim, as he lagged behind Nate and Prince, who were almost to the second camp. Carefully, he attached his clamps to the crevices of the mountainside and secured their grips before pulling himself further up. "Careful now," shouted Prince. "We don't want to bring you home in pieces," he jokingly continued. "Just focus," Nate said, "and don't look down." However, just as Nate mentioned about not looking down, curiously, Jim decided to have a glimpse of what's down below. Needless to say, what he saw did not help at all. Not only did he feel sick to the stomach, he seemed to lose focus. Unknowingly, he failed to attach one of the clamps properly. As he was about to pull up, one of the clamps collapsed. Now, as mentioned earlier, we use different modes of writing in this particular scene. We have description, we have the thought, which refers to what a particular character is thinking of. We also have the dialogue and the actions. Take note that some of the actions in this particular scene also fall under description, because some of the actions which are done by a character could also be described through the use of words. In this example, we're going to include description, dialogue, and thought. His heart was trembling. He knows that one wrong move can cause a great consequence. As he was sitting there with pen in his hand and the paper in front of him, he tried hard to concentrate, to recall the lessons that had been discussed while he was busy about writing random stuff at the back of his notebook. He could feel his sweat forming on his forehead. "Last 2 minutes," the proctor called out. As the 2 minutes were about to end, the proctor slowly approached Ronald and asked him, "Are you doing okay?" "I'm fine, ma'am," he replied. "I'm just worried that I'll have to retake this exam," he thought to himself. Now, as mentioned earlier, the three modes that we have here would be description, dialogue, and thought. And lastly, we have exposition. Exposition provides details about characters or the story. It is used in the beginning and during transitions to inform readers about the passage of time. Now, take note that exposition may be in the form of a flashback or flash forward. Also, exposition tells, rather than shows, readers about important elements of the story or characters. Furthermore, exposition may be used to add drama to the story. For this last example, we're going to include exposition, description, and dialogue. "What time will they be here?" Nana eagerly asked, excitement clearly written all over her face. It's quite expected since it has been a decade and a half since she last saw her brother. "Won't be long now, Nana," I assured her. "Oh, I hope he's fine. The last time I saw him was 15 years ago. Back then, he was a scrawny teenager who was hesitant to leave my side. I remember having to drag him outside the house just so we'd be able to take the bus in time to catch his flight," she said with nostalgia. "I hope that he's already changed." "I'm sure he has, Nana. Don't worry so much about him," I reassured her. As we were talking, someone suddenly hugged Nana behind her back. Surprised, She turned around and saw this tall, muscular man. We then realized that it was Tim. He has greatly changed. From being a little scrawny and cowardly teenager, he has now become a mature man who has gained enough confidence throughout his experience of staying overseas. Now, as mentioned earlier, we have the following forms or following modes included in this particular scene. We have description, we have dialogue, and we have exposition. In a nutshell, when writing fiction, it is important for aspiring writers to become familiar with the different modes of fiction writing. Each of these modes of writing focuses on how it can improve the quality of the content of the stories and literary works made by the writers. And lastly, as aspiring writers, we have to learn how to effectively use these modes when writing our stories.